Now turn to Section 1.
You will hear Elliot, an environmental science student, talking to his tutor about an essay he is writing on captive breeding programs. First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 5. Now listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 5.
Dr. Ran?
Oh, come in, Elliot. Thanks for sending me the draft of your extended essay. Now, you're writing about captive breeding of endangered species, aren't you?
Yes.
Okay. Well, this isn't a bad first draft, but there are some issues I think we need to discuss.
Yes. I wasn't sure if I'd done enough research before I started writing.
I'd say you've got plenty here. Too much in places. You've got this very long introduction on factors threatening the survival of species now and in the future, for instance. It's interesting, but it doesn't address the main issue of this essay.
Oh, I thought I needed to give supporting evidence for my ideas.
Yes, but only for key ideas. You can't cover everything. You've got to focus on the area you've chosen, which is the breeding of endangered species in captivity. Now, you have lots of relevant material about that, but I think you need to look at the planning of your central section again. At present, it's all rather a jumble.
Oh, you mean I need to write it all out again?
Well, it's just a matter of moving the things round a bit. Your introduction needs a rethink, as I said. Why don't you just begin by saying what captive breeding is?
Give a definition.
That's right. Then you should make it clear which are positive points and which are negative ones. For example, you start with the fact that breeding endangered species in captivity may be the only way we have of preserving some from extinction in the years to come, which is clearly an advantage. Now, what other advantages did you mention?
Well, the whole thing about zoos, that since they're the obvious places for captive breeding to take place, this could justify their role in the future. They're not just a place for people to go and stare at animals for fun. And then there's the point that captive breeding eventually allows the animals to be reintroduced to the wild again, in theory at least.
Right. So put those points together. Then the disadvantages.
Well, the point that these programs are very expensive, obviously. Then thinking about the animals themselves, the psychological effects of captivity.
Yes. And you also had a good section on the problem of disease for animals in captivity. But maybe you could have mentioned the poor success rate when they are eventually reintroduced into the wild.
Right.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 6 to 10. Now listen and answer questions 6 to 10.
Now, your next section's on requirements for successful release of these animals into the wild. I think you need some evaluation here. Which of these requirements are more important and which are less important, according to the available data?
I had some information about that, but I wasn't sure if I needed to put it in.
Yes, definitely.
My first point, for example, that's to do with the fact that animals bred in captivity have to be taught how to survive before they're released. All the data shows that's absolutely essential. Unfortunately, if they're just released without training, they won't know how to hunt and how to avoid predators and so on. Some articles suggest that it's necessary, actually, to provide food and shelter for the animals after they've been released, at least for the first few months. But the research suggests that this is less crucial to the successful reintegration of the animals.
Right. You also mentioned the idea of providing employment for local people in the areas where the animals were being re-released, and education, so that they'll see the return of the animals into their habitats as a positive thing.
Yes, that sounds important to me, but I couldn't actually find any statistics or information about it. And I'd have thought it was really important to screen the animals to be sure they were healthy before they were returned to the wild. But the figures show that actually it doesn't make much difference.
That's surprising, yes. Did you get any data on the effects of acclimatization?
Yes, it showed that if animals are kept on the site where they were to be released for a time in order to acclimatize, they have a far better survival rate than those released directly into the wild.
Okay, well, you've got some good information there. Have you thought at all about your final section?
Well, I think I'll be looking at the whole question of habitat protection and whether in fact captive breeding is the answer, or whether we can protect endangered species within their natural habitat.
That sounds fine. So, I think if you go away and make those changes, that sounds quite promising.
Thank you.
Now turn to Section 2. Section 2. You will hear a receptionist, Doreen, talking to a group of parents about the Daisy Daycare Centre. First, you have time to look at questions 11 to 17. Now listen carefully and answer questions 11 to 17.
Hello everyone. I'm Doreen, the receptionist at the Daisy Childcare Centre. Thank you all for coming to our open evening. I'll just show you round and tell you a bit about the place. First of all, I will have to ask you to leave your sneakers and sandals, etc. here on the shoe rack, just inside the main door. You know how the young ones love crawling around the floor, so our policy is no street footwear inside. As you can see, our facility is very open plan. There are lots of different activity areas, and we like to have pretty good visibility throughout the centre. This central area to the left is where we all gather for stories, songs, and some games. That's why the big circular carpet is there. Everyone comes to sit there 2 or 3 times a day. I can see some of you looking at our TV. Some parents worry that we might just dump the kids there to watch rubbish all day, but of course that's not the case. In fact, we only use it occasionally. For example, we use it if we have a story on a DVD, and then we get the kids to do a bit of acting based on that. That bookcase there beside the TV gets a lot of use, though. Some of the older kids choose to sit and read or look at picture books in their free time, but we never allow them unsupervised TV. If you look along the wall on the far side of the little gate leading into the main room, you can see our kitchen play area. It has lots of utensils, pots and pans. And that cupboard closer to the corner is the dress-up cupboard. That's a very popular area, with the boys as well as the girls. You'd be surprised how much the boys get into acting and make-believe. Now over here, opposite the gate and behind the big lunch table, are the sinks and the painting area, and then the doors to the outside. To the right of those outside doors, you can see hooks and little cubby holes on the wall for coats, bags and outdoor shoes. The children can keep slippers in there, but most of them run around indoors in their socks or bare feet. If you can bear it, I think we should pop out into the cold for a moment to have a look round outdoors. We'll just stay under the veranda. The sandpit is over there at the far left of the outside area, and that box next to it is storage space for buckets and spades, and lots of trucks and diggers to push around or even ride on. The slide beside that is popular, and so are the 3 climbing walls over by the fence. Some parents think that's a bit adventurous for preschoolers, but the older ones love them. The ground is covered with bark, so it's not a harsh surface when they do fall. The ordinary swings and a tire swing are here in front, where we can keep an eye on everyone, and then the chickens are way over on the far right, so they can have a bit of peace and quiet occasionally. Okay, so let's go back inside, and I can talk about our rules and policies.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 18 to 20. Now listen and answer questions 18 to 20.
As you probably already know, the government sets limits on adult-child ratios, but we try to improve on those wherever we can. There are different ratios for under and over 2-year-olds. For the under 2s, the rules are 1 adult to 4 children, and we basically stick to that, except that we have an extra roving staff member with no allocated children who helps out wherever there's a need. The older kids have a 1 to 8 ratio, and again we try to have an extra staff member on site. All of our staff are fully qualified, but we do have trainees from the local polytech at certain times of year. We do have pretty strict rules about pick-up times here. It's a real problem if parents are late, and we end up with far too many kids for the number of staff. So we ask you to be very punctual about collecting your children. We have had to ask a couple of consistently late parents to leave, but of course this is only a last resort. We have quite a long waiting list here, especially for the over 2s, but you're welcome to put your name down. The average lead time is usually about 9 months, but sometimes we get unexpected vacancies. For example, maybe a family has to move to another city for work or something, so their child is withdrawn. This means, if you're lucky, your child could be admitted in 3 months or so. Now, are there any questions?
That is the end of section 2. You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turn to Section 3. Section 3. You are going to hear a conversation on rivers. Section 3. You are going to hear a conversation between a moderator and 2 students. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 25. Now listen to the tape and answer the questions.
Today we will hear 2 views of the book Fast Food Nation, The Dark Side of the All-American Meal by Eric Schlosser. Many have deemed this a fascinating socio-cultural report that explains how the development of fast food restaurants has led to the standardization of American culture, widespread obesity, urban sprawl and more.
Well, I think that Schlosser's book promises a lot but delivers less than a highly hyped fast food meal. The book is not well written, and it lacks organization as it skips around in its telling of fast food horror stories. And then he spends a great deal of time on Walt Disney and bashing Disneyland. Why is that in a book about fast food? Bashing is the best word for this book. According to this book, Schlosser clearly believes that the fast food industry is responsible for every problem in America today. From the common cold, to inflation, to malls, to unruly kids, to warts. He blames it all on big business and especially the big food business. The book is written in a breathless, alarming motive that makes it sound like McDonald's and Disney are co-conspirators to take over the world and force every living child to eat greasy French fries. Give me a break. Schlosser is also very biased for the left, praising unions while ripping right-wing values and Republicans. Nixon seems to get special attention. Just having your picture made with him gets sinister prose and makes you a co-conspirator. Despite claims of research, there are numerous blatant assertions such as, parents in the 80s spent more money on their children because they felt guilty about not spending time with them. How does he know that? Is all consumer spending on kids really driven by guilt? The book is a farce. Save your money to buy a Big Mac and read something else. Only read this ridiculous book if you are an anti-Republican, anti-big business, there are evil forces everywhere subverting the world fan.
Thank you, William.
Now look at questions 26 to 30. As the talk continues, answer questions 26 to 30.
Now we'll talk to another person with a very different assessment of this book. So, Jenny, what did you think of Schlosser's book?
Wow, where do I begin? I thought that this book was very informative, very well researched, and a very easy read. Schlosser did a wonderful job of organizing the vast amount of information that he placed in this book. For a non-fiction book, I found that Fast Food Nation kept me entertained throughout its entirety. In fact, I couldn't put it down. The history of the fast food industry itself was fascinating, as well as the background information on the potato and meat industries. The first-hand accounts given by people who work for the fast food industry, as well as the meatpacking and potato plants, added to the reality of the points the book was trying to make. The fast food industry and all industries supported by fast food companies have some serious issues that need to be addressed by the nation. In addition, Schlosser does an excellent job of pointing out the dangers of not only working for these businesses, but eating food supplied by them. It's scary to think about the dangers lurking behind the counter at your local fast food chain. This book really opens your eyes to some health hazards that all of America should be aware of. Everyone should read this book. It will change your eating habits and the way you view large fast food corporations.
This is the end of Section 3. You now have half a minute to check your answers. Now turn to Section 4. Section 4. You are going to hear a talk on Anne Bonny, a female pirate. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 35. Now listen to the tape and answer the questions.
Anne Bonny was one of the two most famous female pirates. She sailed on the crew of Calico Jack Rackham. Anne was romantically involved with Calico Jack, but she could be counted as none the less as fearless as any other pirate. She was born in County Cork daughter of an attorney and his maid. The lawyer left Ireland in disgrace, but found fortune in the Carolinas. There he amassed a fortune and bought a large plantation. A ne'er-do-well pirate sailor named James Bonney married Anne in an attempt to steal the plantation, but Anne's father instead disowned her. Bonney then took Anne to the Bahamas, where he turned informer to Governor Woodes Rogers, turning in any sailor he didn't like as a pirate for a handsome reward. Anne quickly grew to dislike her spineless husband and quickly caught the eye of one Calico Jack Rackham, a pirate of some renown. Governor Rogers had recently passed an amnesty for pirates, which left Bonney out of work. The admiration between Anne and Calico was mutual. Calico Jack was a handsome man who knew how to spend money as well as steal it. Anne was a well-endowed lass with a fiery spirit and a temper that matched that of any man. In any event, Calico offered to buy Anne from Bonney, but Bonney instead took the matter up with Governor Rogers, who said that Anne was to be flogged and returned to her true husband. That night, Calico and Anne slipped out in the harbour, stole a sloop, and began a life of piracy together.
Now look at questions 36 to 40. As the talk continues, answer questions 36 to 40.
Anne fought in men's clothing, was an expert with pistol and cutlass, and considered as dangerous as any male pirate. She was fearless in battle, and often was a member of any boarding party. In October of 1720, retribution was close at hand. The governor of Jamaica, hearing of Calico's presence, sent an armed sloop to intervene and capture the captain and crew. Calico's ship, Revenge, was caught by surprise, and much to Anne's dismay, the pirates fought like cowards and were taken far too easily. Anne and Mary Read were also captured, but, upon capture, confessed their sex and pleaded to be tried separately after they gave birth. Both women were pregnant at the time. Both received separate trials from the men, but were still sentenced to hang. Mary Read escaped the hangman by dying from fever while in jail. Anne, however, received several stays of execution before mysteriously vanishing from official records. It is believed that her father, who had contacts in the island, forgave his daughter for her acts and ransomed her back to the Carolinas, where she assumed a new name and a new life.
This is the end of Section 4. You now have half a minute to check your answers.